From Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson with you. Ahead for you today, K-State's Steve Ensley will talk about mounting concerns over mycotoxins turning up in harvested feedstuffs this fall, and how to go about sampling your feedstuffs for the presence of these toxins. Then we'll visit with Brad Lubben of the University of Nebraska on the results of the midterm elections and if and how that could impact the finalization of the 2018 Farm Bill. He also talks about how the change in power in the House of Representatives might influence other agriculture-related legislation going forward. And on this week's horticulture segment, K-State's Raymond Cloyd talks about landscape insects entering homes now and what to do about them. All this and more next on Agriculture Today.
While many people know hunger is an issue in developing countries, it is also a problem in our own backyards. In 2010, 1 in 7 Kansans struggled to put adequate food on the table. 2 K-State research and extension programs are tackling this problem. The Family Nutrition Program and Expanded Food and Nutrition Education Program reach thousands of Kansans in more than 70 counties. They learn how to eat healthy with a low budget. For more information about these programs, visit ksre.ksu.edu.
Tuned in to the K-State Radio Network and glad to have you aboard for another Agriculture Today. Well, as a result of our weather patterns we've seen this fall in Kansas, there is a genuine worry now about mycotoxins building up in feedstuffs, particularly harvested feed. As we move on into the winter and that grain is fed to livestock, those toxins could raise some potentially dire health problems for livestock. So we brought by from the Veterinary Diagnostic Laboratory here at K-State a toxicologist there, and it's our first chance to visit with Steve Ensley. Steve, welcome back to K-State, by the way.
Well, thanks. I'm happy to be back.
And you are a graduate of the College of Veterinary Medicine here at the university.
Yes, I graduated in 1981.
Mycotoxins. We need to have some sense of what they are.
So mycotoxins are mold toxins, and we have those in our feeds, our grains, and forages even every year. And then if they concentrate to a high enough level to be of concern, then we have health issues. And every species is a little different about the mycotoxins of concern and the concentrations also that may cause an issue. And so this year we've already had some death loss associated with mycotoxins in pigs and horses. And so we've measured just a very few samples of corn and found very high concentrations of fumonisin and aflatoxin. So I'm very concerned that it may be a bigger health issue statewide than the localized cases that we've seen so far.
And these largely generated by the wet conditions at harvest? Is it as simple as that? Or?
Right. Environment is really key to mycotoxin production. And typically with aflatoxin, when we have drought issues, that's when we see aflatoxin issues. If we have cool, wet weather, then we have the fumonisin concern. So with our drought through the state, we were concerned about aflatoxin being an issue with the fall harvest, 2018 harvest. And, initially, the fumonisins were actually what the first mycotoxin that we saw was an issue. And then in the course of trying to look at screening what all mycotoxins are out there, we also have seen aflatoxin be an issue. Vomitoxin is another mycotoxin of concern we want to look at. Zearalenone is another one. Those are the ones particularly of concern for production animals. And even dog food we see, dog food gets manufactured with corn that has high concentrations of aflatoxin, so it can even be a concern for pet foods even.
And the health impacts will vary with the type of toxin in question.
Correct. So, in the 2 cases that we've seen in swine and horses, we've had death loss, pretty high death loss with pigs and horses. So it's that's the most concerning part. It's not only just ill health or adverse health. It's we've seen death loss, high death loss associated with both species and fumonisins.
And it can be gastronomic in nature. It can be beyond that even?
Right. So, every mycotoxin has a target, in the body, depending on the species. Fumonisin is highly variable in horses that are most sensitive to it. It can damage the brain. In swine, it damages the liver and the lung. Aflatoxin is the one that's the main concern for FDA. It's actually regulated by law because it's a carcinogen in humans, so in animals also can be a carcinogen. So, yeah, the mycotoxins, like I say, they're present every year, and most of the time levels that we don't cause a concern. And then when the environment, we get the right environmental conditions like we have had this year, it's a concern.
And cattle can be susceptible to, obviously.
Yeah, right. So we haven't seen any cases in cattle, but they can also be adversely affected. And in the last 2 years, actually, in southwest Kansas, Oklahoma, and Texas, the fumonisin in the grains fed to cattle have been a real issue. We've been following that, or dealing with cases in those areas where cattle were affected the last 2 years. And they can have variable effects. They can be, affect just production like rate of gain of feed efficiency, may damage, may see some liver damage also with fumonisin. So they, for whatever reason, the last 2 or 3 years, they've been a real concern in actually causing adverse health in cattle.
Finer point, but important one. Mycotoxins are not communicable. We need to stress that.
Yeah, correct. So the molds are present in ag environments all the time, and then when they get on the right substrate with the right temperature and humidity, then they grow, and then they produce a toxin. So they can be there and not produce a toxin, or be there and produce toxin like we're seeing this year. But right, they're not infectious in nature like that, so they don't. It's a toxin that gets in the feed. Animal has to consume the feed at the right concentration to become ill.
Mm-hmm. Well, the concern remains high, no matter how you slice it here. Detecting mycotoxins, there has to be some specificity here, you say, as far as accurately doing so.
Right. So the biggest issue with mycotoxins is they're not homogeneous in the grain. So the key to detecting mycotoxins is how you sample, and it has to be a very random sample. You can't take one sample from a truckload or one sample from a grain bin. We like to get multiple samples, as many as we can, and then commingle that, and then we can look at one sample if it's accurately sampled from the feedstuff wherever it comes from. So the most difficult part of mycotoxin detection is the collection of the right sample. The chemistry that we do to do the testing is fairly straightforward, but the sample is the key. So if we get a sample that represents that grain or that forage, even that silage, that will give us an accurate measure if it's there or not and in what concentration. If we don't sample correctly, then we won't actually reflect probably what's actually out there.
In an article on this, you say, Steve, that one of the easier ways of going about that is when that grain is being transported, augured from point to point.
Right. The best time to sample is anytime you move it, from the field to the bin, or from the bin to anytime that grain is moving, and you can get multiple samples along that moving line. That's the best way to sample.
And as far as volume of sample, is there a standard?
So we, our minimum sample is 1 pound of whatever feedstuff that you have, but sometimes that 1 pound that you send in may be actually comprised of 10 pounds of samples that you collect and then mix. Try to do a random mix from the sample that you collected, and then we get 1 pound that we look at in the laboratory then.
Does one need to take care in how they handle those samples once collected?
Right. So there's a little bit of a concern. We want to try to get the sample refrigerated and into us as soon as possible, because we do have issues when we collect it. We collect the feed, and then it sits in a Ziploc plastic bag where it's warm. The mold can grow, and they potentially produce more toxins. So if we can collect the sample, ideally it's a paper sack or burlap, but those aren't very readily available anymore. So most of the time the sample will be collected in a plastic Ziploc bag, a 1 pound Ziploc bag. Just refrigerate that and then keep it cool till we get it into the lab, and then we feel like that will accurately represent where you collected that from.
Then if we've a producer out there collecting the sample, you want them to traffic that through their local practitioner primarily?
If they can. I mean, there are several labs throughout Kansas that can do mycotoxin testing. So you have options that, wherever you want to get it tested, a reliable lab, and then we have several in Kansas that do a good job. The local veterinarian can also work with you. We work with the local veterinarians, and so that's easy for us to do. They know how to send samples and submit to us, and then I can visit with them, about what the interpretation is or what level of concern we have with the mycotoxins that we find.
Well, if a positive read comes of a testing, can that mycotoxin-laden grain be diluted to the point of being usable?
So that's one of the things that we try to do if we know what the action level is. That is one option to blend, except when we're talking with aflatoxin. Aflatoxin is tightly regulated. FDA does not allow you to blend that down to a safe level unless they give you an allowance to do that. So we are working with our state veterinarian, about sampling and how we're going to move forward with aflatoxin, particularly because it's so tightly regulated. So if we have grain that has aflatoxin in it, that triggers a regulatory concern then, and blending may or may not be an option depending on what the regulatory people decide to do. But the other mycotoxins, we have guidelines for those, not as tightly regulated, and so that's one of the options is try to dilute it down to a safe level if you can do that safely.
Well, the details from identification, from the testing procedures, so forth, are pivotal to getting on top of this. So you would advise producers or practitioners, whomever, to stay in touch with folk such as the Veterinary Diagnostic Laboratory on this matter.
If you have any questions, you feel free to contact the diagnostic lab, and we can give you more advice or help you decide what you need to sample or help interpret whatever results you've gotten back so that we don't have any negative impact on the animals.
By the way, there's a handy email, clientcare@vet.kstate.edu, to email those inquiries. And we appreciate the word on this, Steve. Thank you for briefing us on all of this.
Thanks.
He is a toxicologist with the Veterinary Diagnostic Laboratory here at Kansas State University, Steve Ensley. You're listening to Agriculture Today, and we'll be back with more after this over the K-State Radio Network.
What is radon? Home exposure to radon gas is the leading cause of lung cancer death in the United States for non-smokers. In Kansas, 1 in 4 homes will test at or above the EPA action level. The Surgeon General recommends all homes be tested and fixed if necessary. Visit kansasradonprogram.org for more information. Test, fix, save a life. This message brought to you by the Kansas Radon Program, the Kansas Association of Broadcasters, and this station.
Welcome back. You're tuned to Agriculture Today. The 2018 midterm elections are now concluded, and all the dust has settled, and time has been allowed here to assess what has happened in our interest today with the future of agricultural policy and regulations, with the changes brought on by the election results. We're turning now to an agricultural policy specialist out of the University of Nebraska, formerly with K-State Research and Extension, Brad Lubben, to allow his thoughts now that he's had a day and a half or so to contemplate the election returns and what they mean for agricultural policy. And Brad, just generally, your initial response to the changeover, mostly the complexion of the House of Representatives, now in Democrat control.
Right. We did see Democrats pick up seats in the House and gain control, and that should change the trajectory of what that chamber does over the next 2 years. It was a mixed election in the sense that Democrats gained the House, but Republicans actually strengthened their hold on the Senate. That mixed election effectively gave both parties a chance to claim victory in the process here. But we'll see what happens to several key policy issues now that we have some change and shift in power.
Of course, what's high on the minds of agricultural producers and all in agriculture, what will be the disposition of the 2018 Farm Bill now that we've put the election behind us? And the lame duck session is expected to take the measure back up. It's in conference committee, of course, right now. What is your sense of impacts, if any, of the election on this process?
You know, the biggest question is whether this changes the leverage. We've been stuck seemingly for months in negotiations between a staunch position from the Senate, particularly represented by Ranking Member Stabenow, versus the staunch negotiating position of the House Ag Committee Chairman Mike Conaway. Well, that major question remains over the fate of SNAP program reforms and the stricter work requirements. With the shift in the House coming in January, does that change Chairman Conaway's leverage and to say a deal is more important than no deal, because no deal leads to a Democratic House picking the bill back up? So perhaps we see a negotiation that gets a final farm bill because it acquiesces on the SNAP reform and accepts a much more modest proposal. That's the argument that says we get it done because we've perhaps broken through the stalemate and there's reason to get it done. Even Ranking Member Colin Peterson from Minnesota, the Democratic leader in the House Ag Committee, would seemingly prefer to get a farm bill done here now while he is ranking member as opposed to pick it up when he becomes chairman in January. Well, you can look at the chemistry of what the bill was versus what the party might push for, and you could imagine a new House bill deliberation process in a Democratic-controlled House that looks much less ag-friendly than the one that just made it through. And as one of the most conservative members of the Democratic Party, it could be that Peterson sees the current bill as a better opportunity than anything that a Democratic House would sign on to next year. So there's some reason, some observations to suggest that there's a lot of momentum to get this done yet now before the end of the calendar year.
Conversely, though, are there reasons to think that there might be a do-over, if you will, in the new Congress?
Well, arguably, the bill in the House, whatever final bill gets negotiated, still needs Democratic votes if some Republicans hold out and vote against it based on a lack of SNAP or even farm program reforms. Will Democrats even vote for the current bill, or would the Democratic caucus effectively say, we can do this again, and we want to be in lockstep against the bill? So there's some reason, some doubts in there, certainly, of getting the bill done. There are even some members, perhaps of both parties, that have certain proposals, certain reforms that might find more favor in a Democratic House next year. So one can imagine some motivation for wanting to start over. But there is, I think, more momentum to getting it done than there is to delaying it at this point.
But in any event, it will take it right up to the 11th hour of the lame duck session before the finished product is at hand, it would seem.
Right. We're still not close to a final agreement. And even if we can come back to a final agreement in a day when members of Congress return, to get that printed, to get that through on the schedule of both chambers to get a vote here, probably sometime in mid-December. One of the last things they may get done before adjourning for the end of the year.
Brad, let's look beyond the current Farm Bill finalization and to what the new Congress will mean to future policy that would affect agriculture directly. For one thing, as you alluded, there will be committee changes and changes of the leadership for not only the Agriculture Committee in the House, but other committees likewise. Trade and regulation would be right there in the thick of all of that. What's your sense of the high-profile things that would potentially occur here?
Mm-hmm. You know, other issues certainly beyond the Farm Bill are critical to agriculture, and if you can imagine putting a Farm Bill to bed in December, then it really is a new agenda come January. The trade policy issues are right at the top of that list, but don't forget food policy and environmental policy questions as well. Under new House committee leadership, and particularly looking at some of the potential incoming chairs to those selective committees, you might see a much more environmentally friendly committee agenda as opposed to an agricultural friendly agenda or business friendly agenda that pushes more environmental regs. Think the ongoing dispute over the definition of waters of the United States or regulation of pesticides. Those ongoing issues continue. Think of the food policy questions such as labeling requirements for genetically modified organisms or genetically modified processes in food production. That is the responsibility at the moment of USDA to finalize a rule on the proposed labeling disclosure requirements, but we could see continued work in the House in committee discussions and legislation about genetic modified labeling, about organic, about the new artificial / laboratory / cultured meat products. All of those issues are important issues on the agricultural agenda, but they will be under a very different kind of leadership and direction.
That said, though, is there really any real reason to think that there will be monumental changes in this respect on these regulatory issues in particular?
Well, while that could be the direction that the House moves in terms of proposed legislation and hearings and oversight, it's also possible, very possible, to imagine that the next 2 years is effectively it's a campaign for the next general election. Mm-hmm. And the party of the House is different than the party of the White House, and that implies that the House spends a lot of time on oversight and investigation and a lot of obstruction of a White House agenda. That could end up with virtually a stalemate that gets very little done. Right. Now, Democrats control the House. Democrats have a minority, but at least a filibuster-capable minority, so the Republicans don't fundamentally have control of Congress and limited control in the Senate, perhaps to move through nominations, importantly, cabinet and judicial nominations. But there's very little of the other agenda that can't fundamentally move through Congress without some Democratic support. Will that find favor at the White House? That remains to be seen.
And that was the question here, and that is on the Senate side. Yes, the Senate is not filibuster-proof, but Republicans have gained ground there and wield a little more leverage yet than previously. So what does that portend for policy in general, agricultural policy in particular?
Well, you can argue that one of the most important functions of the president, above all the other policy setting, is the nominations in the judicial branch into the courts. Having a strengthening Republican majority strengthens the president's hand at those nominations. So there is perhaps more opportunity, more control for the next couple of years there. But in terms of a major legislative agenda, it still remains virtually impossible to move through an agenda in the Senate without bipartisan support. And so where can you find that bipartisan support that the president can also sign off on? Some are suggesting that infrastructure may have new life because, in fact, the president and the Democrats might not be too far apart from each other in terms of wanting to spend on new construction and new investment. But fundamentally, there are probably few issues where we can find that broad bipartisan support.
Well, we will watch with great intent as to the disposition of the 2018 Farm Bill now that the lame duck session will be underway soon and hopefully expedite the process where we might have legislation on hand before the end of the year. And Brad, at that point, if we may, we'll catch up with you once again and get your input on what the final product actually is. Appreciate your time right here.
Thank you very much.
Agricultural Policy Specialist, University of Nebraska, Lincoln. That's Brad Lubben with some input there on the results of the 2018 midterm elections and the repercussions for agricultural policy coming out of Congress. You're listening to Agriculture Today, and we'll return shortly on the K-State Radio Network.
Did you know every Kansas farmer feeds 128 plus people?
Kansas farmers are hard workers, dependable, authentic, and sensitive.
Not only do farmers put food on your table, but they put clothes on your back and fuel in your car.
For more information about Kansas farmers, visit K-State Research and Extension online or stop by your local extension office. This message has been brought to you by the K-State Animal Sciences Leadership Academy participants.
We're back now on Agriculture Today, coming to you from the campus of Kansas State University. Eric Atkinson with you. And today's agricultural news headlines for you now, courtesy in part of DTN. And relating to our conversation with the University of Nebraska's Brad Lubben just a few moments ago with the midterm elections now in the books, attention among agricultural stakeholders is once again focused on the Farm Bill currently sitting in the House Senate Conference Committee. Incoming House Agriculture Committee Chairman Collin Peterson has made it clear in initial post-election discussions that he's focused on wrapping up the Farm Bill during the lame duck session, unwilling to even entertain the idea of going back to square one in the next Congress. Rather, Peterson is much more interested, he says, in starting off with oversight-related actions, such as examining the USDA's proposal to relocate the Economic Research Service and the National Institute for Food and Agriculture outside of Washington, D.C. Remarking further about the Farm Bill during a post-election call with reporters, Peterson said, "I think we're relatively close," as he put it. He went on to say, "I think we can work this out and get this done before Congress adjourns. That is my number one priority, to get that accomplished," in Peterson's words. Now, President Trump even waded into the Farm Bill debate during a wide-ranging press conference yesterday at the White House, saying, and quoting here, "We could have a very fast bill without the SNAP work rules, but we," meaning the White House, "want the work rules in," and said the president, the Democrats do not want to vote for that. This week's U.S. agricultural trade mission to South Korea is already showing results. Millions of dollars worth of new sales, as we hear in this report from the USDA's Gary Crawford.
Based on what we've seen in the last few days here, we have a very bright future going forward.
That's Ken Ensley. He heads the USDA's Foreign Agricultural Service this week. He's also heading up a trade mission in South Korea, a mission with about 50 U.S. business and commodity representatives and others. And by phone from Seoul, he told U.S. reporters those representatives have conducted over 700 business-to-business meetings. The results so far?
Approximately $3 million for short-term sales to be delivered in the next 1 to 2 months, and estimated at least 30 million sales longer term over a 12-month period.
And he says probably more long-term business will come out of this 4-day mission. The U.S. is already Korea's number one supplier of food and ag products, but it is still denying access to its market for U.S. apples, pears, and stone fruits. The trade mission included meetings with Korean government officials about those and other issues. Isley says there is progress, but it's been pretty slow, at least so far. Gary Crawford for the U.S. Department of Agriculture, Washington.
The leaders of pork, corn, and soybean promotion and research boards have agreed to work on joint research focused on improved environmental sustainability. Here's more on that from the USDA's Rod Bain.
A new agreement was reached this week among 3 prominent ag checkoff boards.
We're excited to announce a new collaboration between the National Pork Board, United Soybean Board, and the National Corn Growers Association. Cooperation between our 3 checkoff organizations on sustainability research directly related to the environmental sustainability indicators of carbon, water use and quality, as well as soil health.
Bill Evan of the National Pork Board announcing the Memorandum of Understanding to farm broadcasters this week in Kansas City.
We're entering a new era of collaboration between national checkoff organizations. They all realize the importance of moving forward aggressively on sustainability, but they also realize their obligation to spend checkoff dollars wisely through partnerships such as this.
Evan adds this agreement could be a model for other commodity organizations and checkoff programs to collaborate on. From the National Association of Farm Broadcasting Convention in Kansas City, I'm Rod Bain reporting for the U.S. Department of Agriculture.
And the director of the Food and Drug Administration's Center for Veterinary Medicine, Steve Solomon, has announced the approval of the first animal drug that reduces ammonia gas emissions from an animal or its waste. Experior is the first drug that, when fed to beef cattle under specific conditions, results in less ammonia gas released as a byproduct of waste. The studies of Experior indicated that the product partially reduces ammonia gas emissions from manure in an individual animal or pen of animals in a semi-controlled condition in enclosed housing. The FDA granted approval of Experior to Elanco. Next up on Agriculture Today, this week's edition of the Kansas Soybean Update. And awaiting with that, as always, is Greg Akagi. Greg?
David White joins us. He serves on the Kansas Bankers Association, Kansas Ag Bankers Board of Directors. And David, the state of the farm economy has weakened the past couple of years. As farmers come in to speak with their bankers, are they and will they experience a different environment when they have that meeting?
The answer to that's a little bit nuanced, a little bit yes, a little bit no. I think by and large, across most of our customer bases, it seems like folks are still in decent financial shape, depending on how they manage things in those good years, but things certainly are more lean with kind of those tougher years that we've seen here the last couple of years. The banking regulators are certainly increasing their scrutiny of each bank's ag portfolios. So as the regulators ratchet up their scrutiny of those portfolios, the management at the banks tend to also kind of increase their awareness. So loan officers are probably going to be asking more questions, asking for more detailed info than possibly years in the past when it was a little bit easier to just say hand in your tax return and balance sheet and kind of get renewal within a few days. So probably some more questions, a little bit more detailed discussion about forecasts and budgets and plans compared to recent years.
And this is where it's key for that farmer really being proactive in communicating with their banker?
Absolutely. Anything that the farmer can do to help make the loan officer's job easier is just going to help yourself that much more.
And it really entails being prepared ahead of time with the proper documents that you need.
Absolutely. If you've got your row crop line of credit coming due here in, let's say 60 days, a lot of lines are kind of due into December or maybe stretching into January. Be reaching out to your loan officer ahead of time and be asking your loan officer what they need in terms of documentation, what suggestions or guidance they have, maybe on some budgeting, getting your arms around cost of production and plans for marketing your crop that maybe you just took off, so that you can kind of go in and have a very productive meeting and conversation to really help that loan officer along as much as you can.
It's so much like farming in the aspect preparation is so key in all this.
No different than getting all your prep work done in the spring before you get the planter rolling. You kind of do all that preventative maintenance, if you will, checking bearings, replacing worn-out blades, what have you. You really need to kind of do the same thing on the business front.
David, we appreciate your time. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Greg.
That is David White, who serves on the Kansas Bankers Association's Kansas Ag Bankers Board of Directors, who joins us on the Kansas Soybean Update. It's brought to you by the Kansas Soybean Commission.
Thanks, Greg. Greg Akagi there. Our weekly horticulture segment is coming your way after the break. This is Agriculture Today. For 25 years, K-State Research and Extension's Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services has been providing a no-cost, confidential place to call in and visit with an agricultural lawyer. Our experts are available to help you producers handle legal and financial issues. Explore your options and generate solutions. Call us at 800-321-3276 or visit us online. Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services. This Agriculture Today continues with our weekly horticulture segment, and it's getting colder by the day, it seems, in Kansas as winter creeps ever closer in earnest. And that means that there are a handful of insects trying to find their winter haven, if you will, indoors. What to do about them, if anything, is our subject here. Raymond Cloyd has joined us once again. He is a horticultural entomologist with K-State Research and Extension. This is an annual alert, basically, Raymond. We do have bugs that seek shelter inside during the winter months. One of those things you're hearing about now is the Asian beetle. What's its story?
Yeah, every year, Eric, we have the Asian ladybird beetle. It used to be called the multicolored Asian ladybird beetle. And about this time of year, actually last month, they would be warming themselves on the south side of a building, and then they move inside of homes through cracks and crevices, and then people will see them on the south side of the building, inside in the corners of window sills. And that really alerts concerns of people. They get freaked out. But that's because in China, where they're from, they overwinter in cliffs. Well, Kansas is a little short of cliffs, right. So a home is the next best thing. And what they do is they aggregate or congregate in the corners of the south side of a building, and they just stay there. I mean, they don't move very much. They don't transmit a disease. And the best way to deal with them at that point is just vacuum them up and put them outside. They're very good predators in the spring, summer, and fall on aphids, but it's that innate behavior they have to overwinter inside of an enclosed structure. No cliffs, a home is the next best thing. So the first thing we recommend is if you can seal any cracks and crevices on the outside of the building to prevent them entering. Once they're inside, let them aggregate in an area and then just go up there and vacuum them up. And then take the bag and put it outside and dispose of them or whatever and let them do their thing.
And just as a quick descriptive here, they are an orange-colored bug by and large?
Yes, they look like our native ladybird beetles. However, they have up to 19 spots. And if you look at their thorax, which is the middle portion of the insect between the head and the abdomen, you'll see a white or black M, and that's how we distinguish it from our native ladybird beetle species. Yeah.
Easy to remove, though. That's the point here.
Just don't do any, let me repeat this, don't do any indoor spray applications, none of these bombs that are, just vacuum them up and put them outside.
All right. Here's a bug that probably causes more dread to folks anyway, spiders in the home, and they will start to accumulate there likewise.
Yeah, we get a number of these we call nuisance pests. In addition to Asian ladybird beetle, we got the box elder bug, we have cluster flies, we have earwigs, we have centipedes and pill bugs and sow bugs and things like that come in. Most of them are going to die because the humidity is just too low in the wintertime. But others like spiders that come into the homes, like ambush and wolf spiders and some of the orb weavers for food source. And so we will get calls or images what to do. And basically it's the same thing as if you seal cracks and crevices and they're coming in the home because there's a food source. So if you can eliminate the food source, that's fine. But the best thing is just to take a piece of paper, jam it under their feet, and just put them outside. Because remember, spiders are predators. They're part of the ecosystem. Many of them are extremely beneficial. So there's no need to squish them. Just escort them outside.
And are any of them of a health threat to humans, such as the brown recluse?
Yes. Now, we do have two poisonous spiders in Kansas, the black widow and the brown recluse. Those are going to be in clutter areas that have not been moved around or disturbed for a long period of time. They're not going to be coming into the home like the wolf, ambush spiders, and orb weavers will. But that's a good point, Eric, is to be aware of brown recluse, especially because it's pretty prevalent in Kansas, that if you're going to put old shoes on or you have clutter, wear gloves because they do carry a caustic poison. And if you are bitten, go to the doctor right away. Brown recluse is easily identifiable. When their legs are spread out, they're about the size of a silver dollar. They have a cello shape on their back, which is from the hairs, and they're the only spiders with 6 eyes. So if you really want to tell what it is, grab it quickly, count the eyes, and if it's 6, put it down quickly too. So, but yeah, spider bites like brown recluse are nothing to fool around with. If you think your children, if you've been bitten, go to the physician right away.
And do not spray spiders either, presumably.
No, most of the materials just don't work for spiders because they either are in very concealed environments, of course, and they walk on their tippy toes. So their feet, so they don't really come in contact with a lethal dose. So we always talk about hygiene and sanitation. The best way is to avoid, not eliminate, but avoid problems with spiders in the home.
Let's move to the outdoors for a moment here, Raymond. And for some of our ornamental trees, protecting those trees with a dormant oil would be a good idea?
Yeah, I really think dormant oils are somewhat not used as much or underappreciated, Eric. But dormant oils are applied in the wintertime, especially in fruit trees when the leaves are gone. And they're designed to kill the eggs of mites and scales that overwinter on the trees. Spruce spider might be one, some others. And they're very effective. And so if you do that, you can reduce the numbers that would occur in the fall, in the next season. So dormant oils are only applied in the wintertime, unlike summer oils like horticultural oils, mineral oils, which you can apply in spring, summer, and fall. But they do kill the eggs of those mites and other insects and scales that overwinter on the trees, yes.
So we're talking here about hand applying that material to trees, brushing on or spraying on?
We recommend spraying is probably the best way to get good coverage and stuff, and thorough coverage of the bark, primarily from the base all the way up to about 6 to 8 feet. Yeah, but again, not all insects will overwinter on the trees, but we do know spruce spider mite, others, and some scales will overwinter in stages that would be susceptible to the dormant oils. They work as suffocants. They're basically block the ability of the eggs or whatever the stage you're overwintering at from breathing.
And it's long since past time to treat against bagworms on our evergreens, but this is a project that could still be carried out when the weather is reasonably decent, and that is you can hand-pick what bagworms are left.
Absolutely. If the female bags, when you grab a bag and it gives, it's male. But remember that bagworms right now are in the egg stage, and that's at the overwinter, and each bag can contain between 500 to 1,000 eggs. So every bag you remove, think about that. And then you put them in soapy water, and that'll kill them. Don't put them in your tote, whatever, because you'll have these bags, these eggs hatching next year, whatever. So get the family out there on a nice, cool winter day and just hand pick as many bags as you can. I know this year was a banner year for bagworms, so really it would be to everybody's benefit to think about doing that a couple weekends.
And then dunk those bags into warm soapy water.
Soapy water, about 1 to 10 solution of Lysol or some soap, that should kill them, yeah.
Raymond, as always, thanks for coming over. We'll catch up with you again in the relative near future.
Always look forward to it, Eric.
He is a horticultural entomologist with K-State Research and Extension, Raymond Cloyd, along with us on this week's K-State Horticulture segment. And with that, our time's away for this Thursday edition. We'll be right back here tomorrow at this same time and hope that you will as well. In the meantime, Eric Atkinson bidding you a good day for Agriculture Today. This is the K-State Radio Network.